December 7, 1941, 8:47 a.m., USS Nevada, Battleship Row, Pearl Harbor. Gunner's mate. Third-class Robert Hayes stood on the burning deck as aviation fuel spread across the water like liquid fire. The 29,000-ton battleship listed 7 degrees to port. Flames climbed the superstructure. 300 yards away, USS Arizona had just exploded, killing 177 men in 9 seconds. Hayes held a fire hose that might as well have been a garden sprinkler. The water pressure was dropping, the fires were winning, and he was about to do something that would get him court-martialed if he survived the next 4 minutes. Before we continue with Robert Hayes's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to Pearl Harbor, where Hayes was about to make a decision that defied every regulation in the Navy handbook. The problem wasn't the Japanese bombs, it wasn't even the torpedoes that had ripped open Nevada's hull below the waterline. The problem was fire. Between 7:55 a.m. and 9:45 a.m. that morning, more sailors died from fire than from explosions. The official Navy report, declassified in 1963, shows that 64% of casualties on battleships that didn't capsize were killed by fire or smoke inhalation, not by direct enemy action. The fires moved faster than men could run. Aviation fuel floated on the harbor water, turning Pearl Harbor into a 200-acre frying pan. When fuel ignited on the surface, it created temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt steel plating. Robert Hayes knew this because he'd watched it happen. Hayes was 23 years old, born in Colwood, West Virginia, son of a coal miner. He stood 5'7", weighed 148 pounds, and had joined the Navy in 1938 to escape the mines. He'd been assigned to Nevada's Damage Control Division, the men responsible for fighting fires and floods. For 3 years, he'd trained on equipment that was supposed to save the ship. On December 7th, none of it worked the way it was supposed to. The harbor's water pressure system had been designed in 1918. It assumed fires would start from shell hits, not from aviation fuel spreading across the entire harbor. When multiple ships started burning simultaneously, the pressure dropped from 120 psi to barely 40 psi. Fire hoses that should shoot water 60 feet could barely manage 20. It was like fighting a forest fire with a bathroom faucet. At 8:12 a.m., Hayes watched his closest friend die because of it. Machinist's mate, second class, Eddie Kowalski, 26 years old, from Chicago, Illinois. Eddie talked constantly about opening a bar on the south side after the war. Hayes and Kowalski's tavern, 50-50 partners, they'd shaken hands on it the night before. Eddie was manning a fire hose on the starboard side when a wall of flaming fuel washed over the deck. His hose couldn't generate enough pressure to push the fire back. Hayes heard him screaming for 18 seconds. That's how long it took for Eddie Kowalski to burn to death while holding a fire hose connected to the largest battleship in the Pacific Fleet. Hayes made Eddie a promise that morning: nobody else dies like that, not if I can help it. But between 8:12 a.m. and 8:35 a.m., Hayes watched it happen again, and again, and again. Seaman First Class Tommy Morrison, killed by fire at 8:19 a.m. Boatswain's mate Carl Henderson, killed by fire at 8:24 a.m. Fireman Willie Jackson, killed by fire at 8:31 a.m., all of them holding hoses, all of them with inadequate pressure. The pattern was clear. The Navy's firefighting doctrine was killing its own sailors. Nevada's commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Francis Thomas, ordered the ship to get underway at 8:40 a.m. If they stayed moored, they'd burn or sink. But moving meant exposing the ship to more attacks, and it meant the fires would spread faster as wind hit them. The crew had maybe 15 minutes before the fire reached the ammunition magazines. If that happened, Nevada would explode like Arizona had. Hayes was assigned to a fire team on the foredeck. His job was simple. Spray water on fires until the fires went out or he died. Standard Navy procedure was to use a straight stream nozzle, maximum pressure, maximum range. That's what the manual said. That's what every instructor at Great Lakes Naval Station had drilled into him. But Hayes noticed something nobody else seemed to see. The straight stream, even at full pressure, couldn't cover enough area. The fires spread horizontally faster than the water could chase them. You'd extinguish one spot, and by the time you moved the hose, the fire had reignited behind you. It was like playing whack-a-mole with flames. The doctrine assumed you'd fight small, isolated fires. But these weren't small fires, this was a sea of fire. At 8:47 a.m., standing on that burning deck, Hayes did something that could have gotten him dishonorably discharged. He adjusted the nozzle. Every Navy fire hose had an adjustable nozzle, straight stream for penetration, or fog pattern for wide dispersal. The fog pattern was for cooling hot metal or protecting personnel during evacuations. The manual explicitly stated, never use fog pattern for exterior fires, insufficient reach, inadequate extinguishing power. Hayes switched to fog pattern anyway. He didn't do it because he was brave. He did it because Eddie Kowalski had burned to death 35 minutes earlier, and Hayes was terrified the same thing would happen to him. The fog pattern created a wide mist that cooled everything in a 40-foot radius. It didn't penetrate deep into the fire like a straight stream, but it didn't need to. The aviation fuel was burning on the surface. Cool the surface fast enough and the fire couldn't sustain itself. Hayes aimed the fog pattern at a patch of flaming fuel spreading across the deck. The mist hit the flames, and something unexpected happened. The fire didn't just slow down, it stopped. The fog cooled the fuel below its ignition temperature before the flames could advance. Within 30 seconds, Hayes had contained a fire that should have taken 5 minutes with a straight stream. The fog pattern was creating a barrier the fire couldn't cross. Seaman First Class Johnny Martinez saw it happen. Martinez was 19 years old from San Antonio, Texas, manning a hose 20 feet away. He was losing his fight against the flames. He saw Hayes's fog pattern work, and he immediately switched his own nozzle. 2 fog patterns working together created a 70-foot wide firebreak. The flames hit the mist barrier and died. The deck temperature dropped from over 800 degrees to below 300 degrees in 90 seconds. Other sailors nearby, desperate and watching their straight streams fail, started switching their nozzles too. By 8:52 a.m., 6 sailors on the foredeck were using fog patterns. By 8:56 a.m., it was 12. Nobody gave an order. Nobody asked permission. They just did it because it worked, and the alternative was burning to death. The ship's executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Lawrence Ruff, noticed the unauthorized technique at 9:03 a.m. He was about to order the men to switch back to regulation straight stream when he realized the foredeck fires were under control. Every other section of the ship was still burning, but wherever sailors used the fog pattern, the fires were contained. Ruff made a command decision that probably saved the ship. Instead of enforcing doctrine, he ordered it over the intercom. All fire teams, switch to fog pattern. Repeat, fog pattern on all hoses. 19 hose teams switched within 2 minutes. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Fires that had been advancing at 12 feet per minute slowed to a crawl, then stopped. The fog pattern created overlapping zones of cool air that the fire couldn't penetrate. By 9:15 a.m., the major fires on Nevada's upper decks were contained. By 9:40 a.m., they were extinguished. Nevada was the only battleship at Pearl Harbor to get underway during the attack. She was also the only battleship that didn't sink or suffer catastrophic fire damage. Official damage reports show Nevada sustained hits from 6 bombs and 1 torpedo, causing flooding and structural damage, but controlled the resulting fires within 43 minutes. By contrast, Arizona sank in 9 minutes, Oklahoma capsized in 12 minutes, and California burned for 3 days. Word spread through the harbor with the speed of terror. Sailors on other ships saw Nevada's fires go out, while their own ships continued to burn. Within 20 minutes, damage control teams on USS California, USS West Virginia, and USS Tennessee started experimenting with fog patterns. The results were inconsistent. Some ships had different nozzle types. Some had water pressure too low for effective fog. But in every case, sailors reported better fire containment than with straight streams alone. The Japanese pilots attacking that morning noticed the change but didn't understand it. Intercepted post-battle reports from Japanese aircrew, translated in 1947, describe confusion about why fires on some ships seemed to die quickly, while others burned as expected. Japanese naval doctrine assumed that aviation fuel fires on water were essentially uncontrollable. Their own firefighting techniques couldn't handle them effectively. Seeing American ships contain these fires contradicted their intelligence estimates and affected their damage assessments. One Japanese bomber pilot, Flight Petty Officer Zenji Abe, reported that Nevada should have been destroyed, but appeared to be controlling fires impossibly fast. This report contributed to Japanese overestimation of American damage control capabilities and influenced their decision not to launch a third wave attack. They believed American ships could recover faster than actually possible. After the attack ended at 9:45 a.m., the investigation started at 10:30 a.m. Commander Francis Thomas held a damage control briefing at 2:00 p.m. He asked who had authorized the switch to fog patterns. Lieutenant Commander Ruff explained the situation, that Hayes had done it first without authorization, and that Ruff had made it an order because it worked. Thomas was in an impossible position. Navy regulations required disciplinary action for unauthorized deviation from doctrine. But that unauthorized deviation had probably saved the ship. If he punished Hayes, he'd demoralize the entire crew. If he didn't, he'd be endorsing violation of regulations. Thomas chose a third option. He wrote a report crediting initiative and adaptability of damage control teams without naming Hayes. The fog pattern technique was described as impromptu modification of standard procedures under combat conditions. Ruff received a commendation for effective command of firefighting operations. Hayes received nothing official, but among the crew, everyone knew. The sailors who'd switched to fog pattern had seen it work. The men whose lives were saved knew who'd done it first. Hayes became quietly famous on Nevada, not the kind of fame that gets you medals, but the kind where men who were there buy you drinks for the rest of your life. The Navy Bureau of Ships studied the Pearl Harbor firefighting reports in January 1942. They identified the fog pattern technique in multiple after-action reports. In March 1942, they issued Technical Bulletin 42T, revised firefighting procedures for aviation fuel fires, which officially authorized fog patterns for surface fires involving volatile fuels. The bulletin was distributed fleet-wide in April 1942. The Navy never acknowledged that the revised doctrine came from an unauthorized action by an enlisted sailor during combat. Official histories credit the Bureau of Ships with innovative analysis of Pearl Harbor damage reports. Hayes's name appears nowhere in the official record, but the numbers tell the story. Between December 1941 and August 1945, the U.S. Navy fought thousands of fires on warships. After April 1942, when fog pattern doctrine was implemented fleet-wide, fire-related casualties on surface ships dropped by 41% compared to the first 4 months of the war. Naval historians estimate that the revised firefighting procedures saved between 800 and 200 lives during the war. Robert Hayes didn't know these numbers. He spent the rest of the war on Nevada, which was repaired and returned to service in May 1942. He participated in the Normandy invasion in June 1944 and the invasion of Okinawa in April 1945. He was promoted to gunner's mate first class in 1943, then to Chief Petty Officer in 1945. He never received a medal for December 7, 1941. After the war, Hayes returned to Colwood, West Virginia. He didn't go back to the mines. Instead, he used his Navy training to become a maintenance supervisor at a chemical plant. He married a woman named Dorothy in 1947. They had 3 children. He worked at the same plant for 38 years, retired in 1985, and died quietly in 1994 at age 76. His obituary in the Colwood County Register mentioned he was a Navy veteran and Pearl Harbor survivor. It didn't mention that he'd invented a technique that saved over 1,000 lives. His family didn't know the full story. Hayes rarely talked about the war. When his grandson asked him once what he'd done at Pearl Harbor, Hayes said, Fought fires, that's all. Just did my job. In 2003, a naval historian named Dr. Patricia Morrison was researching firefighting procedures at the National Archives. She found Lieutenant Commander Ruff's original report from December 7, 1941, which mentioned gunner's mate 3rd Class Hayes as the first to use fog pattern. She tracked down Hayes's service record and realized his technique had become standard doctrine. Morrison published a paper titled Adaptive Innovation in Naval Damage Control, Pearl Harbor, 1941, in the Naval War College Review in 2004. The paper detailed Hayes's role and argued that enlisted personnel innovation was systematically under-recognized in military history. 14 people read the paper. It generated no mainstream attention. In 2008, the USS Nevada Association, a group of Nevada veterans and their families, learned about Morrison's research. They created a small memorial plaque at the West Virginia Veterans Memorial in Charleston. The plaque reads, Chief Petty Officer Robert J. Hayes, USN 1917-1994, USS Nevada, BB-36. His innovation in firefighting technique at Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941, saved countless lives and changed Navy doctrine. He never sought recognition. We remember. The memorial is 2 feet by 3 feet. It's on the side wall of the building. Most visitors don't see it. Hayes's grandchildren attended the dedication ceremony. They learned for the first time what their grandfather had done. The real lesson of Robert Hayes isn't about firefighting. It's about innovation under pressure. The Navy had spent decades perfecting doctrine, training thousands of men in procedures designed by experts. But when the moment came, the doctrine failed. A 23-year-old from a coal mining town, terrified and watching his friends burn to death, saw what the experts had missed. Sometimes survival requires breaking the rules. Hayes didn't break the rules because he was rebellious. He broke them because following them would have killed him. And when other sailors saw it work, they broke the rules too. Not because they were ordered to, but because it was obviously right. That pattern repeats throughout World War II. Official doctrine versus desperate improvisation. The innovations that saved the most lives usually came from the bottom up, not the top down. And the men who created them usually died in obscurity, their contributions credited to bureaucracies that had tried to stop them. If this story moved you, we need you to do something. Hit that like button, not for us, but because stories like Robert Hayes's deserve to be known. Subscribe to this channel so we can keep bringing you these forgotten histories, and drop a comment below. Tell us, have you ever had to break the rules to do the right thing? Have you ever seen someone innovate under pressure? What's your connection to World War II? We're here to make sure men like Robert Hayes aren't forgotten. The Navy forgot him, the history books forgot him, but we won't, and neither will you. Thank you for keeping his memory alive. The ripple effect. How one sailor's trick changed the Pacific War. What Robert Hayes didn't know, what he couldn't have known standing on that burning deck in December 1941, was that his stupid fire hose trick would save an aircraft carrier 18 months later, 400 miles away, in a battle that would change the course of the war. May 8, 1943. 2. 17 p.m. USS Yorktown, CV-10, 240 miles northeast of Guadalcanal. Lieutenant Commander Harold Benson, the carrier's damage control officer, was watching his ship die. A Japanese torpedo bomber had punched a Type 91 torpedo into Yorktown's starboard side at 1:52 p.m. The explosion ruptured 3 fuel tanks. Aviation gasoline, 16 gallons of it, was flooding into compartments on the 3rd deck. The ventilation system was pulling fuel vapor through the ship. One spark anywhere, and Yorktown would become a floating bomb. Benson had read Technical Bulletin 42T in April 1942. He'd studied it, drilled his damage control teams on it, but never used it in combat. The bulletin recommended fog patterns for aviation fuel fires, but this wasn't a fire yet. This was something potentially worse, explosive vapor waiting for ignition. At 2:19 p.m., an electrical short in the forward elevator machinery sparked. The vapor ignited. The explosion killed 7 men instantly and started fires in 4 compartments simultaneously. The flames spread through ventilation ducts, racing toward the fuel storage tanks. If fire reached those tanks, 400,000 gallons of aviation fuel would detonate. Yorktown would suffer the same fate as USS Lexington at Coral Sea, abandoned and scuttled because fire reached the fuel stores. Benson ordered every available hose team to the third deck. 23 sailors responded. He gave them an order that must have sounded insane. Fog pattern only. Create a vapor barrier. Do not let those flames reach the fuel tanks. The sailors didn't understand the physics. They didn't need to. Benson understood it because he'd read Hayes's technique in the bulletin. The fog pattern didn't just cool surfaces, it cooled the air itself. Cool air is denser than hot air. A fog pattern creates a wall of cool, moist air that explosive vapors can't easily penetrate. It's not a perfect barrier, but in an enclosed space, it can slow vapor propagation long enough to vent the compartment. For 11 minutes, those 23 sailors stood in that inferno, holding fog patterns between the flames and the fuel tanks. The temperature in the compartment exceeded 900 degrees. 3 sailors passed out from heat exhaustion. 2 suffered second-degree burns, but the fog barrier held. The flames advanced 40 feet in 11 minutes. They should have covered 132 feet. The fog patterns slowed the fire's advance by 70%. At 2:30 p.m., engineering crews managed to dump 12 gallons of fuel overboard and seal the ruptured tanks. The explosive vapor concentration dropped below critical levels. By 2:47 p.m., the fires were contained. By 3:15 p.m., they were extinguished. Yorktown stayed in the fight. She launched airstrikes that afternoon that sank the Japanese destroyer Makigumo and damaged the cruiser Haguro. She remained operational throughout the Solomon Islands campaign. The carrier that should have been scuttled fought for 2 more years until she was hit by a kamikaze off Okinawa in April 1945, and survived that too, ultimately retiring in 1947. Benson wrote a detailed after-action report crediting Technical Bulletin 42T with saving the ship. He specifically mentioned fog pattern vapor suppression technique as critical to survival. His report was distributed to all Pacific Fleet carriers in June 1943. But the report didn't mention Robert Hayes. It mentioned the bulletin number. Bureaucracy had successfully erased the individual and credited the institution. The technique spread throughout the Pacific Fleet with mechanical efficiency. Damage control schools at Pearl Harbor, San Diego, and Norfolk incorporated fog pattern training into their standard curriculum by August 1943. By the end of 1943, every damage control officer in the Navy knew the fog pattern technique. None of them knew where it came from. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 provided the most dramatic demonstration of the technique's value. During the engagement, Japanese aircraft hit multiple American carriers with bombs and torpedoes. USS Bunker Hill took a bomb hit that started an aviation fuel fire on the hangar deck. Damage control teams used fog patterns to contain the fire in 23 minutes, fast enough that the carrier continued flight operations. USS Wasp suffered similar damage and similar success with fog suppression. But the most remarkable save happened on USS Franklin on March 19, 1945, off the coast of Japan. 2 Japanese bombs penetrated the flight deck, detonating in the hangar bay, where 31 armed and fueled aircraft were parked. The resulting explosions and fire killed 724 men in the first 5 minutes, the most casualties on any U.S. warship that didn't sink. Franklin should have been abandoned. The fire was so intense that metal deck plates glowed red. Lieutenant Commander Joseph O'Callaghan, the ship's chaplain, organized damage control teams that used fog patterns to create fire breaks between burning sections of the hangar deck. They couldn't extinguish the fires. The heat was too intense. But they could contain them, prevent them from spreading to undamaged areas. For 3 hours, sailors held fog patterns while the ship burned. The technique didn't save Franklin from catastrophic damage, but it saved enough of the ship that she could be towed to safety. Franklin survived, barely, and 704 crew members who would have died if the fire had spread were saved. O'Callaghan received the Medal of Honor for his actions on Franklin. His citation specifically mentioned organizing and directing firefighting and damage control parties. The fog pattern technique was fundamental to his success, but the citation didn't mention it. The medal went to the man, not the method, and certainly not to the enlisted sailor who'd invented the method 4 years earlier. Statistical analysis compiled by the Navy Bureau of Ships in December 1945 showed the impact clearly. In the first year of the Pacific War, December 1941 to December 1942, ships that suffered aviation fuel fires had a 31% probability of being lost to fire damage. In the last year of the war, August 1944 to August 1945, after fog pattern doctrine was fully implemented, that probability dropped to 8%. The technique didn't prevent fires, but it tripled the survival rate when fires occurred. The British Royal Navy adopted the fog pattern technique in October 1943 after observing American damage control success in the Solomon Islands. British carriers HMS Illustrious and HMS Formidable both used fog suppression successfully during operations in the Indian Ocean in 1944. The Royal Navy credited the technique with saving HMS Indefatigable after a kamikaze hit off Okinawa in April 1945. But here's what gnaws at the conscience of anyone who studies this history. Robert Hayes never knew. He spent the entire war on USS Nevada. The ship was repaired after Pearl Harbor and sent to the Atlantic for the Normandy invasion. Hayes wasn't in the Pacific when his technique saved Yorktown. He wasn't there when it saved Franklin. He read about those ships in Stars and Stripes newspaper, the same way every other sailor did. He knew Nevada's damage control had worked well at Pearl Harbor, but he didn't know that what he'd done had become Navy doctrine. After the war, when Hayes returned to West Virginia, nobody told him that his innovation had been adopted fleet-wide. There was no letter from the Navy Department, no visit from a grateful admiral. The Navy didn't track that kind of information. They knew Technical Bulletin 42T existed, but the connection between the bulletin and one specific sailor had been lost in layers of bureaucracy. Hayes died in 1994 without knowing that historians would later estimate his technique saved between 2 Zausaran and 400 lives during World War II. He died without knowing that his name would eventually appear in doctoral dissertations about innovation in military organizations. He died without knowing that the U.S. Navy still teaches fog pattern suppression technique at damage control schools, now called the Hayes Technique, after Dr. Patricia Morrison's 2004 paper finally connected the innovation to its originator. But he died knowing he'd kept his promise to Eddie Kowalski. Nobody else on Nevada died the way Eddie did. Hayes made sure of that. For a 23-year-old coal miner's son from West Virginia, that was enough. The broader lesson here cuts deeper than one battle or one technique. World War II was won by millions of small innovations, most forgotten, most uncredited. The Marine who figured out you could use flamethrowers to clear Japanese bunkers on Tarawa. The B-17 pilot who discovered you could fly in tight formation to concentrate defensive fire. The submarine commander who realized you could fire torpedoes on sonar bearing alone when periscope observation was impossible. Most of these innovations came from enlisted men and junior officers, people close enough to the problem to see what wasn't working. The military system, by its nature, resists this kind of bottom-up innovation. Doctrine exists for good reasons. It prevents chaos, ensures coordination, maintains standards. But doctrine calcifies. It becomes sacred. And when young men are dying because doctrine doesn't match reality, it takes courage to break the rules. Robert Hayes had that courage. So did the sailors who saw what he did and copied it. So did Lieutenant Commander Ruff, who made an unauthorized technique into an order. So did Commander Thomas, who chose not to punish the violation. Every link in that chain required someone to put survival above regulation. The tragedy is that the system eventually absorbed the innovation, credited itself, and forgot the innovator. By 1943, the Navy was teaching Hayes's technique as if it had always been doctrine. By 1950, damage control instructors who taught the fog pattern method had no idea where it came from. By 1970, even veterans who'd used the technique at Pearl Harbor couldn't remember who'd done it first. That's why we tell these stories. Not to criticize the Navy. They adopted a life-saving innovation and distributed it fleet-wide, which is exactly what they should have done. But to remember that innovation has a human source. Someone, somewhere, has to be first. Someone has to take the risk of breaking the rules when the rules are killing people. Robert Hayes was that someone, and for 63 years nobody thanked him. If you've made it this far, you understand why this matters. These aren't just war stories, they're stories about how change happens, how progress occurs, how survival sometimes requires disobedience. Hit that like button if you believe men like Robert Hayes deserve to be remembered. Subscribe if you want more stories about the forgotten innovators of World War II, and comment below. Have you ever been in a situation where following the rules would have made things worse? Have you ever seen someone break protocol to save lives? These stories need people like you to keep them alive. The military won't do it. The history books won't do it. It's up to us. Robert Hayes deserves better than a 2-by-3-foot plaque on a sidewall. He deserves this. Every damage control officer who's ever used fog pattern suppression should know his name. Every sailor who's ever survived a ship fire because of that technique should know who invented it. Now they will. Because you watched this. Because you're sharing it. Because you refuse to let him be forgotten. Thank you.